The wilderness can hide forces far beyond human understanding, where silence and shadows carry unseen danger. From the remote boreal forests of northern Ontario, where a couple's RV was found crushed and clawed amid enormous haunting footprints, to the Alaskan backcountry, where two fishermen awoke to find their gear rearranged and the ground trembling under unseen steps. In this video, we'll uncover 6 chilling encounters that reveal something immense, powerful, and terrifyingly intelligent. On August 30th, 2025, Mark and Elena Novak drove their RV deep into the boreal forests of northern Ontario, leaving behind the sparse logging roads and any hint of civilization, seeking solitude among the towering spruce and cedar. The couple had been careful, meticulously planning their route using old maps, GPS devices, and even a satellite tracker, hoping to avoid the crowds of summer hikers and fishermen. Mark, a seasoned outdoorsman in his mid-30s, had grown up hunting in these forests, knowing the rhythm of the land and the habits of the wildlife, while Elena, a botanist by training, had always been drawn to the isolation, finding inspiration in moss-covered trunks, delicate lichen, and the quiet hum of untouched wilderness. They carried ample provisions, a compact generator, and an assortment of camping gear. Their intention had been simple: to immerse themselves in the forest for a week, away from phones, emails, and the small anxieties of urban life. At first, the forest greeted them with its familiar serenity, sunlight filtering in shafts through the canopy, the smell of damp earth mingling with the resinous scent of pine. Birds called from unseen perches, and small mammals scurried at the edge of the underbrush. Mark guided the RV along rutted, narrow paths, maneuvering around fallen trees and slick, mossy rocks, while Elena cataloged unique plant growths, her notebook filling with sketches and notes. They made camp in a small clearing, a natural hollow bordered by thick spruce that muffled the wind and created a sense of isolation so complete it felt as though the rest of the world had vanished. That night, they built a small fire, its crackling warmth a sharp contrast to the chill settling over the forest floor. By the third day, something had shifted. Mark had noticed unusual patterns in the mud near the clearing, impressions too large to be any bear or moose he had ever seen. They were roughly circular, with a depth suggesting immense weight, and they seemed to appear without any clear trail leading in or out, as if whatever had made them had emerged from the trees like a shadow born of the forest itself. He mentioned it casually to Elena, but she, engrossed in a rare fern specimen, dismissed it as a trick of erosion or misinterpreted animal tracks. That night, strange sounds echoed across the clearing, low thuds against tree trunks, distant rustling in places where no animal should have been moving. The couple, though uneasy, told themselves it was wind, or perhaps a wandering moose. The fourth day brought a sense of unease that neither could shake. The RV, parked carefully in the hollow, bore subtle scratches along its side, deep gouges in the paint that had not been there the morning before. Elena found sap smeared across the windows and mud pressed into the treads of her boots, though she was certain she had wiped them clean before leaving the vehicle. Mark tightened the generator's cover and checked his rifles, a hunting habit that now carried a tense undertone rather than routine reassurance. They stayed close to the RV, exploring only the edges of the clearing, and each time they glanced at the shadows among the trees, movement seemed to ripple just beyond the corner of their eyes. By late afternoon, the forest itself seemed to change. The air grew heavy with an almost imperceptible tension, and the usual chorus of birds and insects fell silent. The sun, angled low behind thick branches, cast long, angular shadows that seemed to stretch toward the RV like grasping fingers. It was then, as Mark adjusted the antenna on the roof, that they first heard the sounds close and deliberate. massive branches snapping under weight far heavier than any deer. A low, dragging noise that made Elena freeze. Mark scanned the perimeter with binoculars, catching a fleeting glimpse of a hulking shape moving silently between the spruce, taller than any man, hunched and deliberate, almost unnervingly intelligent in its motions. It vanished before he could focus, leaving only the tense silence behind. The final encounter, as later reconstructed, was sudden and brutal. The RV was struck from the side by tremendous force, twisting metal inward, shattering windows and slamming the vehicle against a fallen pine. Mark and Elena were caught inside as walls were clawed, mud and pine sap smeared across every surface as if the forest itself had grown angry. Witnesses later, rangers investigating the missed check-ins, found the couple lifeless, the scene marked by drag lines leading from the vehicle into dense underbrush, footprints enormous and irregular tracing a rough circle around the RV. The rangers' report, methodical and cautious, noted the intelligence implied in the scene, a deliberate force applied, an understanding of the couple's movements, and the quiet efficiency of the attack. Though the ranger could not account for what had caused the devastation, locals spoke in hushed tones of a presence in the woods, something that moved with purpose and patience, watching from the shadows and disappearing before it could be confronted. The clearing itself became taboo. Even the most seasoned hunters avoided it, reporting a strange stillness at dusk, the sense that the forest was aware, alive and watchful. Footprints reappeared from time to time, enormous and unmistakable, but no photographs or clear evidence could be captured, leaving only the memory of Mark and Elena's final moments and the lingering dread that the woods held a creature of immense size and calculated intelligence, patient and silent, just beyond the reach of human understanding. The ranger, in a final note, observed that the scene suggested more than just a wild animal attack. The careful placement of force, the selective destruction, and the fleeting glimpse of movement through the trees implied cognition, perhaps even strategy. Mark and Elena's ambition to immerse themselves in the untouched forest had led them to the heart of something they could not anticipate, and the forest, indifferent yet deliberate, had ensured that their presence would be their last. Since then, the clearing remains avoided, the story of the Novaks told only in whispers and ranger reports, a chilling reminder that some corners of the wilderness are neither tamed nor forgiving, and that what lingers in the shadows of northern Ontario's boreal forests may be far larger and more intelligent than anyone dares to imagine. November 12, 2024, was a fog-draped night. Matthias Keller drove his timber-laden truck along a remote stretch of mountain highway in the Swiss Alps, a road so isolated that even experienced drivers rarely traveled it after dark. The highway wound through steep cliffs and dense pines, the white glow of snow contrasting sharply with the inky shadows of the forest, and the fog clung to the asphalt in thick banks, muting the world into shades of gray. Matthias, a veteran long-haul driver with decades of experience navigating treacherous alpine routes, had grown accustomed to the rhythm of night driving, the vibration of tires over frost-hardened roads, the echo of distant avalanches in the valleys, the way shadows could trick the mind into seeing movement where there was none. Yet as he rounded a hairpin bend at 1:45 a.m., a sudden, violent shudder ran through his rig, shaking the cab with the force of a collision so severe that his knuckles whitened around the steering wheel, and the cargo behind him rattled as though the logs themselves were alive. Heart racing, Matthias eased the truck to a stop along the guardrail, his engine's low growl vibrating beneath him, and grabbed his flashlight, sweeping the beam across the asphalt and snow. The road itself bore deep gouges, irregular in width and length, tearing the asphalt like it had been clawed or pressed by immense weight, and the snow beside the highway revealed prints far larger than any human could make, elongated and deeply set into the icy crust. He stepped carefully toward the edge, the flashlight trembling in his grip, the pine-scented air sharp against his lungs, and froze as he noticed movement, or what he thought might be movement. A dark form crouched low in the tree line, impossibly tall and broad, unnaturally muscular, watching him with a deliberate stillness that sent a cold chill down his spine. By the time he blinked, the figure had vanished, absorbed into the pines with a speed and silence that defied reason, leaving only the fog-shrouded mountains and the trembling logs behind him. Shaken but determined to assess the damage, Matthias returned to his cargo. The logs, once secured and evenly stacked, now lay in precise geometric arrangements, some positioned vertically against the guardrail, others forming straight, almost architectural patterns on the asphalt. The sheer intentionality of it made his stomach knot. The work was too orderly, too deliberate to be the action of any bear or mountain predator. He ran his hands over the smooth bark, tracing the neat angles, and the chill of unease settled deeper, mingling with the fog that pressed against the cab windows, seeming almost alive. He climbed back into the driver's seat, hands trembling, muscles taut, and continued onward in silence, the rig crawling along the narrow highway as though the road itself had become an extension of some unseen presence. Over the next few days, the story spread quietly among local drivers and forest rangers. Other truckers who traversed the same stretch reported similar disturbances: gouged asphalt that looked like deep scratches from some enormous claws, massive footprints pressed into snow and mud, and timber mysteriously rearranged in patterns too precise for natural causes. One driver, a young man hauling construction lumber, had found his load stacked in a pyramid along the guardrail, the logs balanced with a care that defied gravity and logic, leaving him pale and speechless for hours. Authorities arrived to investigate, examining the prints and the marks on the asphalt, but could offer no explanation, noting only the impossibility of such force applied without mechanical intervention and the unnerving intelligence suggested by the rearranged logs. No official records attributed the incidents to any creature. The reports remained open, unresolved, and filed with a cautious, almost reluctant tone that hinted at the officer's own unease. For Matthias, the experience lingered like frost on his skin, a memory that grew sharper with each passing day. He recalled the figure in the trees, hunched yet towering, its movements deliberate and calculated, and the cold certainty that it had been watching him long before the first shudder struck his rig. Even on familiar roads, he found himself checking over his shoulder, scanning tree lines for that impossible silhouette, remembering the weight in the air, the precise patterns of logs, and the unshakable sense that whatever had crossed his path was not an ordinary forest animal, but something far larger, far more intelligent, and far more aware of him than he could ever be of it. The highway itself gained a quiet reputation among long-haul drivers, a whispered caution that carried weight among those who knew the mountains. No one dared to linger in the fog at night. Trucks slowed to a crawl, and even seasoned loggers avoided the hairpins where the gouges appeared. The prints emerged, and timber was inexplicably rearranged. Locals spoke of the forest as though it had a mind, a presence that measured intrusions, studied patterns, and could act with deliberate force when provoked or observed. While no one officially confirmed the creature's existence, the accounts shared among drivers, hikers, and rangers painted a consistent picture. Something massive, cunning, and patient roamed the Swiss Alps, moving with ease through the trees, capable of exerting tremendous force and leaving behind marks that no human or known predator could replicate. Matthias returned to the highway only once more, months later, hauling timber on a daytime run, and the memory of that foggy November night pressed against him like a living thing. The gouges and prints were gone, erased by winter snow and spring thaw, but the impression it had left on him remained indelible. The lingering certainty that intelligence had been there, that observation had been made, that he had been studied and recorded by a presence beyond comprehension. He told himself it was best to drive on, to keep moving, to avoid lingering in the shadowed forest. Yet even years later, the memory returned in moments of silence. A shudder in the rig, the shape of something enormous crouched between the pines, and the deliberate precision of logs stacked in ways no human would attempt. In that quiet reflection, Matthias understood a truth few ever confronted. Some places, some forests, held beings whose patience, size, and awareness far exceeded human understanding, leaving nothing behind but deep gouges, massive footprints, and an unshakable sense of being watched. On July 7, 2019, Dmitry Volkov, a seasoned climber in his late 30s, set out to conquer a remote peak in the Ural Mountains, far beyond the reach of logging roads, settlements, or even the faintest human presence. He had climbed hundreds of mountains across Europe and Asia, and the challenge of untouched rock faces and narrow ledges drew him like a moth to a flame, the isolation and danger part of the appeal. His gear was meticulously packed, ropes coiled with precision, carabiners clipped and unclipped in systematic order, harnesses and pitons checked and double-checked, a small supply of food and water, and a lightweight tent meant for emergencies. He had planned a single-day ascent, but carried supplies for several in case he was delayed by weather or unforeseen obstacles, which he considered likely in the unpredictable Urals. The climb began in clear light, the early morning sun glinting off rock faces slick with dew and moss. Dmitry moved with the quiet confidence of someone intimately familiar with heights, his muscles coiled and unrelenting, hands gripping edges with practiced strength, boots finding purchase on the smallest ledges. The wind sang through the mountain passes, sharp and cold, and the scent of pine mingled with the metallic tang of exposed stone. By midday, he had reached a ledge that overlooked a series of narrow cliffs and dense forest below, a precarious perch that demanded constant attention to balance and foothold. He paused only to sip water and observe the wilderness stretching endlessly in every direction, untouched and indifferent, a world of shadows, light, and silent trees. As dusk approached, Dmitry's progress slowed, his movements careful, deliberate, and methodical. The temperature dropped suddenly, a biting chill that crept through his jacket and gloves, and the wind picked up, rattling loose stones along the slopes. Hours later, when a search team arrived the following morning after he failed to check in, they found the scene that would haunt the region for years. His climbing gear lay scattered across the narrow ledge, ropes dangling over edges, carabiners and pitons partially buried under dust and moss, suggesting a sudden abandonment rather than an orderly stop. His body lay below, partially obscured by boulders, positioned unnaturally, and notably, it showed no signs of a fatal fall or struggle, wounds minimal and consistent only with blunt impact from a short distance, as if he had been moved or forced from his perch. What immediately caught the rescuers' attention were the footprints. Enormous, deeply impressed, and irregular, they traced a rough circle around the ledge before continuing into the thick forest below, where they vanished abruptly, swallowed by the dense undergrowth. Their sheer size alone defied the possibility of any human or known large predator, and the deliberate path implied observation and calculation rather than random wandering. Nearby branches were broken at heights impossible for a man to reach, and large rocks on adjacent slopes had been shifted, almost as if arranged with intention, forming subtle patterns that suggested intelligence and strength far beyond what Dmitry had anticipated. Rangers who examined the site quietly confided that the scene suggested an enormous force, capable of careful and deliberate action, and perhaps even enough to manipulate or remove a human from a ledge without leaving evidence of a typical struggle. Locals in the valleys beneath the peak spoke in hushed tones of climbers who vanished without trace, of strange impressions in snow or mud, of rocks shifted impossibly high, and of the eerie silence that settled over the mountain just before the wind changed. Many refused to climb the Ural peaks at all, warning that the place held a presence that was patient, intelligent, and massive, waiting for moments when a human crossed its territory, watching silently before deciding when and how to act. Stories circulated of figures glimpsed in the trees, hunched but impossibly tall, moving with a deliberate, quiet precision, leaving behind only footprints, displaced rocks, and the haunting sense of being studied by something beyond comprehension. For the search team, the details of Dmitry's demise defied conventional explanation. There was no evidence of an accident, no trace of loose ropes causing a fall. and nothing to indicate an animal attack typical of bears, lynx, or wolves. Yet the rearranged rocks, broken branches, and footprints told a story of force and intelligence. The body's position, carefully tucked under boulders, seemed deliberate, almost as though whoever or whatever had interacted with him understood concealment, observation, and the necessity of leaving minimal evidence. To the rescuers, the scene suggested calculation rather than chaos, a level of awareness that made them hesitate in documenting their findings too explicitly, leaving only cautious notes in the official report. Years later, the peak remained largely avoided by climbers and hikers. Those who did venture near spoke of an oppressive stillness in the upper slopes, the sound of shifting stones without a source, and the unnerving impression of being watched from heights where no human could stand. Guides who once brought clients to the area altered their routes, citing instinct and experience over any recorded danger. The legend of Dmitry Volkov, a man skilled in heights and wilderness survival, became intertwined with cautionary tales whispered among mountaineers, a reminder that some mountains harbor forces beyond human comprehension, capable of observing, manipulating, and perhaps even removing intruders with terrifying efficiency. For those who studied the site, the footprints and shifted boulders remained the most compelling evidence. Each element suggested an entity of enormous size and intelligence, one capable of deliberate action, knowledge of terrain, and the patience to wait for the right moment to intervene. Even without photographs or recordings, the weight of the evidence, combined with the accounts of local rangers and climbers, painted a consistent picture. The Ural Peak was home to something immense and calculated, something that had claimed Dmitry Volkov and left behind only tracks, displaced rocks, and an enduring sense of unease. On January 16, 2021, Jake and Maria rented a small hunting cabin tucked deep within the forests of western Montana, deliberately choosing a location far from roads, neighbors, or any hint of civilization. Jake, a rugged outdoorsman with years of backcountry experience, had spent countless winters tracking elk and deer in the Rockies, while Maria, quieter but no less adventurous, relished the solitude, the frozen rivers, and the silent expanse of snow-covered timberlands. They arrived mid-afternoon, the low winter sun casting long shadows across drifts of fresh snow, and spent hours securing firewood, checking the cabin's structure, and unpacking provisions. The air was crisp and pungent with pine, and the surrounding pines were tall and dense, their branches heavy with snow, forming a natural barrier that muffled even the harshest wind gusts. The couple set up the interior with precision, stacking firewood neatly beside the stove, securing supplies in the loft, and ensuring every latch on the windows and doors was tight. The first night was quiet, save for the whisper of wind through the treetops and the occasional creak of frost settling in the cabin walls. Jake slept lightly, accustomed to the sounds of the forest, while Maria drifted into deep rest, lulled by the isolation and snowbound silence. Around 3 a.m., however, the subtle serenity fractured. Jake awoke to a low, resonant thumping against the wooden walls, each pulse reverberating through the cabin like the beating of some immense heart, and then a loud, splintering sound as the front door frame shuddered violently under pressure. Heart hammering, he froze, listening as the noise repeated in an irregular, methodical rhythm, punctuated by scraping and cracking that suggested immense weight pressing against the structure. Maria's dog, usually vigilant but subdued, erupted into frantic barking that echoed across the snow-drenched clearing, then abruptly fell silent, the sudden absence of sound even more chilling than the noise itself. Jake gripped a flashlight and moved cautiously toward the window, every muscle coiled in tense readiness, aware of the cold metal of his rifle against his back. Through the frosted pane, shadows shifted beyond the cabin walls, enormous and hunched, moving with deliberate purpose, each motion measured and unnervingly deliberate. On the roof above, he noticed deep gouges carved into the timbers, grooves so wide and heavy that they could only have been made by immense hands or claws pressing down with calculated force. For a tense moment, the forest itself seemed to hold its breath. Jake could see the figure crouched at the edge of the clearing, massive and dark against the pale snow, its shape hulking yet strangely fluid, moving with an astonishing speed and grace that belied its size. When it disappeared into the dense pines, leaving only the shifting snow and the quivering dog behind, Jake exhaled sharply, his mind racing to reconcile what he had seen with everything he understood about wildlife in the Rockies. He cautiously stepped outside, crunching over the frozen snow, and was confronted by the evidence of the encounter. Enormous footprints, some over 2 feet long, pressed deeply into the snow in irregular looping patterns that suggested observation and consideration rather than random wandering. Each print was elongated, with wide pads and a pronounced arch, sinking through the crust of ice as though the weight behind them had been extraordinary. As dawn approached, the forest revealed more strange signs. Branches near the clearing were snapped high above, bent at angles unnatural for wind or deer, and logs that had lain in disarray were now stacked in almost deliberate formations, pointing subtly toward the edge of the tree line, as though some unseen architect had left instructions in the quiet white expanse. The couple's firewood remained untouched inside the cabin, yet the arrangement of natural debris outside suggested that the presence had interacted selectively with its environment, deliberate in movement, deliberate in impact, leaving behind marks that conveyed intelligence and careful planning. Jake and Maria spent little time discussing what had happened, the shared fear and tension evident in their silence. By mid-morning, they packed hastily, the snow crunching underfoot, the cabin's shadows stretching long and dark across the clearing, a silent reminder of the night's events. The forest seemed impossibly still as they drove away, each glance to the tree line filled with unease. The memory of massive prints, rearranged logs, and gouged timbers burned into their consciousness. They avoided looking back, understanding intuitively that the presence remained, patient and deliberate, watching and waiting beyond the reach of human perception. In the weeks that followed, locals confirmed that the area had developed a quiet notoriety. Hunters and hikers who ventured too close reported strange impressions in the snow, unusually heavy branches broken high above the ground, and patterns of rocks and fallen timber that suggested calculation. None captured photos or video, and no official report attributed these occurrences to any specific creature. Yet the accounts were consistent. The forest seemed alive with intelligence, enormous in scale and deliberate in action, leaving only signs of observation and occasional forceful interaction. Authorities, while investigating initial reports of the cabin incident, documented the physical evidence, the prints, gouges, and displaced logs, but offered no explanation beyond noting that the occurrences were anomalous, mysterious, and unexplained. Even years later, the clearing surrounding the cabin remained avoided, marked by cautionary tales among hunters and backcountry guides who spoke in low tones of shadows moving between the pines, of prints far too large to be human, and of the quiet patience of whatever had claimed Jake and Maria's night. The evidence remained tangible: gouged timbers on the roof, footprints frozen in the snow, and carefully rearranged debris, all pointing to an enormous presence capable of observation, calculation, and deliberate, intelligent action. For those who knew the area, the lesson was clear. Some corners of Montana's wilderness were far from tame, inhabited by forces whose scale, strength, and awareness left a human presence fleeting and profoundly vulnerable, and whose patience ensured that any intrusion would not go unnoticed. On June 15, 2025, Amelia and Victor, seasoned wilderness enthusiasts in their late 20s, ventured deep into the northern Quebec boreal forest, drawn by the promise of untouched landscapes and the rare spectacle of caribou migration. They navigated logging tracks in shallow creek, carrying only what they could pack on their back, determined to set up camp in a location entirely removed from roads, settlements, or other human presence. Amelia, meticulous and observant, had spent years photographing wildlife without disturbing it, while Victor, a naturalist and amateur tracker, relished reading subtle signs in mud, moss, and broken branches. Together, they felt confident in their knowledge and skill, believing the vast forest held little threat for those who respected it and understood its rhythms. The first days passed without incident, the forest providing a serene backdrop of whispering pines, shimmering streams, and the distant calls of caribou. They set up their camp beside a narrow clearing along a known migration trail, pitching tents with careful attention, arranging cooking gear and stacking firewood neatly beside the stove and around the perimeter to keep it dry. At night, the air was crisp and scented with pine resin, and the only sounds were distant running water, occasional bird calls, and the soft rustle of undergrowth stirred by small mammals. The couple moved cautiously beyond the clearing, tracking caribou hoofprints in mud and wet moss, noting the subtle impressions left in lichen, feeling entirely in command of their surroundings. On the third night, the subtle tension began. Amelia woke to the feeling of being watched, a prickling unease she could not ignore, while Victor, ever attuned to the quiet of the forest, noticed the faint but deliberate rearrangement of their supplies. Tents that had been perfectly aligned were slightly skewed, cooking utensils shifted by inches, and small personal items, bottles, notebooks, even a pair of gloves, moved just enough to suggest observation without outright interference. At first, they dismissed it as careless movement during sleep or the work of wind or small animals, but the precision and pattern of the changes gradually became undeniable, each adjustment almost intentional, deliberate in its subtlety. Days later, rangers investigating after the couple missed their scheduled check-in discovered the campsite in a state of eerie perfection, tents zipped and standing upright, cooking gear neatly stacked, and firewood arranged in concentric circles around the perimeter, untouched by wildlife. Footprint, enormous and unmistakably human-like yet far beyond normal scale, circled the clearing, impressing deep into the damp earth with the weight of something immense. Following the prints into the forest yielded only confusion. The impressions looped repeatedly, forming near-perfect spirals before disappearing entirely among thick spruce and fir, as though the forest itself had swallowed both tracks and pursuer. Every observation suggested intelligence behind the formation, a careful, patient presence measuring and rearranging the environment. Weeks later, a local trapper discovered the couple wandering barefoot near the forest edge, disoriented and silent, eyes wide with the raw edge of fear, unable to speak for hours. When Amelia finally whispered, her voice trembling, she described the forest as though it were alive, moving things on its own, arranging animals in intricate patterns, and producing shadows that mimicked their every motion. She recounted, in halting, frightened sentences, how she had watched small prey, rabbits, birds, and occasionally fish, displaced and arranged in ways that made no ecological sense, as if some intelligence were conducting an observation, a study, or perhaps a game. The spiraling footprints, the rearranged camp, and the eerie stillness of the clearing were consistent with her description. The forest had acted with patience, awareness, and deliberate calculation. Investigators and rangers who examined the site noted the strangeness of the evidence, recording the enormous footprints, the perfectly stacked firewood, and the concentric circles that defied natural placement. Nothing suggested conventional animal activity. No claw mark, no scat, no disturbed soil aside from the spiraling track, and no evidence of human interference. The patterns were too deliberate, precise, and repeated to be random, and even the most experienced rangers admitted privately that the scene suggested a force of exceptional size and intelligence, moving deliberately through the landscape, capable of observing, manipulating, and concealing activity without leaving clear evidence. For Amelia and Victor, the experience had been transformative and terrifying. They returned to civilization, shaken, their sleep troubled by the memory of shadows flitting at the edge of vision, prints so massive they seemed impossible, and the awareness that whatever had observed them possessed patience and awareness far beyond any known animal. Even when recounting events, Amelia's voice trembled, her words hesitant, as though naming the entity might invite its attention again. The forest, she said, was alive with awareness, moving silently, measuring and watching, leaving only subtle but undeniable signs that its presence was constant and deliberate. The campsite remains undisturbed in the northern Quebec wilderness, avoided by locals and adventurous travelers alike, regarded as a place where human activity is fleeting and profoundly vulnerable. Footprints and rearranged debris appear intermittently, whispered about in ranger reports and local tales, but no photographs or recordings exist. The story of Amelia and Victor serves as a chilling reminder that in the deep, untouched boreal forest, a presence of enormous size, patient intelligence, and deliberate observation may exist, capable of influencing the environment without being seen and leaving behind only traces, loop, spiral, and the lingering sensation of being watched. Some corners of northern Quebec are not passive wilderness, but active territory, governed by a patient, intelligent presence that observes intrusions with meticulous attention, moving things subtly and vanishing before any human could fully comprehend its scale or awareness. Amelia and Victor's flight from the forest was immediate, instinctive, and permanent. The memory of what they experienced lingers like frost on the mind, an indelible imprint of the silent, deliberate intelligence that rules the remote Canadian wilderness. On July 19, 2018, Jonas and Peter, experienced fishermen in their early 30s, paddled deep into the Alaskan wilderness, setting up camp along a remote river that wound through dense spruce and alder, miles from any road, trail, or sign of human activity. Both men had spent years navigating the state's backcountry rivers, reading water patterns, tracking salmon run, and observing wildlife with patient care. Yet even their seasoned instincts sensed that this stretch of water existed beyond the reach of ordinary human knowledge, a place where silence carried more weight than the roar of rapid or the chatter of bird. They pitched a small tent beside the riverbank, arranged gear carefully, and stacked firewood within reach, establishing a campsite that reflected meticulous preparation and intimate understanding of wilderness survival. The first hours passed without incident, the river flowing with its usual hiss and churn, the air thick with the scent of wet timber and algae, punctuated by occasional calls of distant waterfowl or the rustle of small mammals in the underbrush. By nightfall, darkness enveloped the river entirely, and the men's lantern threw a warm, flickering circle of light across the clearing. Then, as midnight approached, the forest seemed to shift, an unnatural stillness settling over the landscape. No bird call, no insect chirp, not even the familiar whisper of leaves in the wind. The silence pressed against them, tangible and heavy, yet no source of threat was immediately visible. Jonas was the first to sense a disturbance. He felt a sudden tug on his fishing line and pulled, expecting the familiar resistance of a salmon struggling against the current. But when he brought the net to shore, he found the fish already gutted, perfectly skinned, lying upside down, its flesh clean and untouched by his knife. The precision was unnerving, and an instinctive chill ran down his spine. Moments later, Peter's lantern flickered violently, casting long, wavering shadows across the riverbank. And when Jonas trained his flashlight toward the muddy shore, he noticed enormous footprints pressed deeply into the soil, some nearly 2 feet long, their edges sharply defined and irregularly spaced, forming a rough, deliberate pattern around the campsite. Then came the sound, a low, rhythmic thumping from the tree line, deliberate, almost methodical, echoing through the clearing like the footsteps of something immense circling their camp. The ground vibrated subtly under the weight, a pulsing presence that seemed aware of every movement. Jonas swung the flashlight toward the edge of the forest and caught a fleeting glimpse of a massive, hunched figure moving with astonishing speed through the trees, its dark outline disappearing between trunks and brush, in a motion far faster than any human or bear could manage, leaving only the impression of its size and deliberate presence behind. As the men watched in tense silence, the forest seemed to exhale and resume its unnatural stillness. By morning, the evidence of the night's encounter became more apparent. Fishing rods, previously laid haphazardly, had been stacked neatly against a tree. Nets were lined meticulously along the water's edge, and branches, stripped of smaller twigs, had been arranged in arrow-like formations pointing upstream. as though guiding attention or leaving a message only an observer could comprehend. Firewood remained untouched inside their circle, suggesting selective interaction and a remarkable level of observation. The two men, shaken and uneasy, understood instinctively that they had been studied, evaluated, and observed by something intelligent, deliberate, and enormous. Jonas and Peter left immediately, abandoning the riverbank, paddling silently downstream as the forest's quiet seemed to stretch endlessly around them. Neither spoke during the journey, both acutely aware that what they had witnessed defied explanation, but demanded respect and caution. Upon returning to the nearest settlement days later, they recounted their experience in careful detail, describing footprints far larger than any bear or known predator, movements too swift and precise to be natural, and evidence of intelligence in the rearrangement of their gear and the deliberate positioning of natural objects around the camp. Rangers who later examined the site noted the footprints, the patterns of shifted gear, and the arrow-like branch arrangements. They found no signs of human interference, no evidence of known predators capable of such precise, selective behavior, and no traces of damage to the surrounding forest, aside from broken undergrowth and displaced branches. Their official reports cautiously documented the anomalies, but offered no explanation beyond acknowledging that a large, intelligent, and deliberate force had likely been present. No one officially attributed the occurrences to any specific creature. The findings remained unresolved, filed in quiet reports and accompanied by notes of caution for future river expeditions. The river remained largely avoided in subsequent years, whispered about among fishermen and backcountry guides as a place where the forest's intelligence could be felt and measured, but never fully understood. Occasional visitors reported unusual silence at night, glimpses of movement too large and fast to be human, and gear mysteriously displaced despite meticulous arrangement. Each account reinforced a consistent pattern. The presence was deliberate, patient, intelligent, and capable of observing human activity without detection, interacting selectively, and leaving only subtle yet unmistakable signs of its existence. For Jonas and Peter, the memory lingered like frost along the river's edge, an indelible reminder of their vulnerability in the backcountry and the deliberate intelligence that had studied them silently from the tree line. They never returned to that stretch of river, and neither spoke of the incident casually, knowing that what they had encountered defied comprehension and was better left undisturbed. The forest, the river, and the shadows between the trees retained their secret, an immense presence moving with awareness and patience, capable of shaping its surroundings, observing intrusions, and vanishing before any human could fully grasp its scale or intention.